it was like such an amazing, warm feeling that came over me that I belonged to something that was just beyond my European roots.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Kate Show. I'm really happy to bring back Kenny Lee Lewis to my channel. He is a long standing member of the Steve Miller Band, and he's been here before, most recently to talk about his work among Indigenous peoples, raising awareness for the fact that so many women and what's it called? Two-spirit people go missing and on from the reservations and are never found and are never pursued and given the time of day, really. And yeah, he was a part of a really awesome ceremony to not just entertain but also to bring closure and healing to people. And when we talked, when we had that conversation, it was really interesting to learn about his family connections to certain indigenous tribes and to hear about his spiritual journeys and things like that. It just didn't fit in so well to that last conversation, so I decided to put it into a part 2, and here we are. So yeah, Kenny Lee Lewis is an awesome guy. He's married to one of my favorite people ever, Diana Steinberg Lewis, and I highly recommend checking out our conversations as well. They're just so awesome and fun to talk to, and I hope that you will enjoy this conversation. It's a little different from what I usually have here, but I think it's really cool to hear about people's spiritual journeys and to hear about what fills up their hearts and what they think about different kinds of theology and different ways of thinking. So anyway, let's jump right in. I wanted to know a little bit more about how it's been for you just discovering this part of yourself. How has it been like in this as a spiritual journey and learning about the cultures that make up your DNA a little bit?
Well, it starts with just doing the family tree and seeing if there really is a part to the legend in the family. In my family, we were supposedly related to some big holy man that they actually named a town after up there named Brantford, and his name was Joseph Brant. His Indian name was Thanasia, and he was a Mohawk. He actually was not a Brant, which was something I discovered that I don't even think my family realized. His mother, her husband, his father, passed away at an early age, and she remarried into a Turtle Clan part of the Mohawk tribe with a guy. His first name was Brant. His Christian first name was Brant, and then his last name was like Karanaragi or something. I can't remember. It started with a K. I can't pronounce it. But so she married into this family, and what happened was people in the community, as young Joseph, I guess was his Christian name, was growing up, they used to say, "Oh, there's Brant's Joseph." So in other words, he was a stepson of this holy man named Brant. So they would speak to it as though he was sort of like he was the new son, the stepson of Brant. So there's Brant's Joseph. That's what they started saying. And so then one day, and this is just speculated on my part, the Census Bureau was probably taking a census up there, and they wrote it down in reverse because a lot of times they would put the surname in reverse, So instead of saying Brant's Joseph, they just wrote him down as Joseph Brant, when really his stepfather's first name was Brant. So that really was what made everything confusing, because we had a Brant relative in our family who claimed that she was related to Joseph Brant. This goes back to upstate New York in Kanagahari, which was the what they considered to be the holy seat of the Mohawk, sacred tribe. This goes back right after the Revolutionary War. So I don't want to go into a big long story about this, but that was the first thing I had to do, is unravel that. And then I looked into the Brants through our Ancestry.com, which were the Brants that were in my family. Come to find out, that name was not a Native American name. It goes back to Rhode Island, and our relative from Rhode Island was a Brant, and his name was Simon. Simon, I think it was Simon. But anyway, Simon Brandt fought with George Washington against the Six Nations because the Mohawks and most of the Six Nation tribes were treated very well by King George, of England, much better than the colonists and George Washington. So as the French Indian War moved forward into the American Revolution, the Iroquois Haudenosaunee people started relating themselves to King George, who gave them really beautiful big grants of land along the Grand River up in Ontario and stuff. And if you've ever been up there and seen those reserves, they look nothing like Browning or Rosebud or Pine Ridge or any of the horrible reservation conditions that are in our country. But that being said, what happened is that Brant I was related to was fighting with George Washington against the Iroquois. So he was not a part of the Mohawk tribe. But here's another thing. The Brant name in the Iroquois world is a very holy name because there was somebody named Brant, last name, probably English, at some point that did interbreed with Iroquois people, I would say probably before the Revolutionary War, 1700s at some point. And so the Brant name became synonymous with the Turtle Clan, and which was the royal family that was part of the Mohawk seat. And what's interesting about the Mohawks is it's a matriarchal royalty bloodline. So the royalty bloodline runs from mother to son or daughter, and it usually goes from mother to daughter, and that's how it travels. The Iroquois Haudenosaunee had a branch of their government, which was actually a female branch of the government. And when Benjamin Franklin copied their governmental seat to try to make it, our U.S. government is actually fashioned after the Iroquois Federation. I mean, they actually had a House of Representatives, a Senate. They called it something different, but he loved the way that everything worked. The executive branch, blah, blah, blah. Nothing could be passed unless it passed this. And one of the branches that they had was a mother clan, female only part of the government that if a law or something was going through, if it didn't pass through that bunch, they had to go back and rewrite it. So that was a really interesting part of history that really made me, wow. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I wish we would have done that in the US because we really missed out on an opportunity there to put females in power much earlier than what's going on today.
I'm interested in the feelings of like discovering.
Okay, what happened was I met a woman named Cinda Hughes. She was Kiowa. I met her in Oklahoma, of all places. And she introduced me to Tim Johnson, who is also another person who's heavily involved in community affairs. And he is directly related to Joseph Brant. So when I met him, it was like, oh my God, here's a guy that's the real deal. And my family's saying that this is what we are. I need to start hanging out with him to find out more what's going on. So he introduced me to everybody up there, brought me into the folds of the reservations, which is a town called, oh God, it's with a W. I always pronounce it wrong. Anyway, but he introduced me to those folks. So when I started meeting these people and started going to some of the longhouses, I went to the school. I started learning the language. I met a woman named Michelle who actually teaches Mohawk. And I just had an affinity. I just had a feeling that there was a drop of blood inside of me that was burning, that I felt so comfortable. And they felt comfortable with me, even though I didn't have any proof that I was related to them or was Mohawk or whatever, other than my family legend. They just went, you know what? We feel it. We feel it. You don't have to prove anything with a blood quantum. We already feel it. So just stop all that nonsense and just come on in. It was like, okay. And then I had to let that go because, with all this stuff with, Elizabeth Warren and Pocahontas and all this stuff that was going on in the U.S. at the time, I didn't want to be put in that bag that I was trying to be a poser, if you know what I mean. So after a while, they just said, we're going to give you involved in our musical events. We're going to have you involved in our sacred ceremonies. Just come on, just be it. They said, being Native American or First Nations is not necessarily just a blood quantum. It's a state of mind. It's a way of living. And then I learned about Iron Eyes Cody, who was an actor that was an Italian guy from Sicily. And he was one of the, big Native American actors that was in Hollywood for so many years. And raised his children as Native Americans on the res in teepees, married a Native American woman. He was not a Native American, but he just became a Native American. And he was well accepted. He was actually accepted. So, if you read about, when you see Dances with Wolves and you hear about Quanah Parker's mother, and read all these books about people that were taken early, into the tribes, like on pioneer days, they just became Native American people, and it wasn't a blood quantum thing. So to answer your question, once I felt that, it was like such an amazing warm feeling that came over me that I belonged to something that was just beyond my European roots, which I already knew. And even though it was a very small part of my ancestry history, it burned. And that was the thing that, and because I've always been a little bit of a rebel, a rock and roller, I've always been against the grain, you know, uh, not necessarily obtuse to authority, but I would challenge it and ask questions. And so when I got into the Native American causes, I started realizing that it just fit. I mean, I went to Standing Rock. I mean, I just started connecting on so many levels that all these little switches started going on and off. And then I realized that I have to really dedicate my time and effort to these people because I feel that they're as much as my family as my brothers and sister is, who are also Native American by way of the same thing. My sister did show markers in her blood, a quantum, same parents, but my brother and I did not, which is interesting. Of course, they say that DNA testing has got to happen more before we can get accurate readings, whatever. But just the fact that my sister showed indicators gave me some hope that maybe this was true. So it's a great feeling that I belonged to something that was beyond myself. Then, of course, an affinity to, being a hippie from the 60s, and long hair, and all that stuff, it just made sense, smoking the pipe, of course, we were smoking different stuff because this is not marijuana. This is a completely different type of this is a holy tobacco that they use that's all part of the peace pipe. It's a whole other thing when you do pipe. That's a different story.
I imagine that this whole discovering your that part of you that burns to connect with the Native American background and all this stuff that's so sacred. It must really make you feel closer to God.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I've been a Christian, for half my life. I was, well, maybe 2/3. I mean, my dad was agnostic. He didn't really want to follow any particular religion. His father was, raped by a priest in Catholic boys' school. And he just didn't want to have anything to do with organized religion. But he did say grace at dinner time, which I thought was interesting, that he believed in a higher power. He just didn't want to attach it to any particular brick and mortar group. So I had a spiritual feeling. And of course, I was in the YMCA, I was in the Boy Scouts. There was some spiritual overtones in those organizations. But I didn't really study the Bible until I met a girl in high school who was, born again Christian, sweet girl, and she had me started to come to Bible studies. So I kind of became a Christian on my own, away from my mom and dad. My mom was fringe, she was from Ohio River Valley, and she had a Christian background. So basically, she just kind of went along with my dad, and she was more into like Christian science and science of the mind, and other kinds of esoteric Christian religion. So when I got into the Bible, I came home and I was preaching to them. And they were like going, "Hey, don't come home and preach to us. You're just a little kid." And I'm going, "You're all going to hell." It's like, it was pretty funny. And so eventually I fell out of it again when I became a rock and roller, because then, of course, it was all about the flesh and sensation and music and, all that, rock and roll, come on. And then so when I met my wife, and I met her mother, who was a Christian minister, Diane's mother, Martha Jean, the Queen Steinberg, she baptized me. And because I never had a full immersion baptism, and it's just a ceremony. Doesn't mean that you immediately become a righteous Christian. It just means you get dunked, and you get woke up, and you kind of go, "Whoa, what was that?" And of course, I did that the first time I smoked a joint when I was 13. So I'd already had those experiences, but this was more ceremoniously that I was going to study the teachings of Yeshua, who is really the proper name of Jesus, and then eventually fell away again, and then came back again, and then eventually started becoming a music minister at a couple different churches along with Diane, and got back into it. But I've always kind of just had Yeshua as a part of all the teachers that I've studied, because I've studied them all. I've studied, studied Judaism. Obviously, one of the Christian churches that Diane and I went to was actually two Jewish people that got Jesus. I wouldn't say they were a Jews for Jesus church, but they just converted. They just accepted Jesus as their Messiah. But we learned all of the Jewish ceremonies. We learned all the Jewish history. We learned everything about the temple, all the celebrations. We did Yom Kippur, we did Seder dinners, we did everything, and so anyway, we learned how to be Jews. And if you learn how to become a Jew, then you can really understand how to be a Christian, in my opinion. All these people that completely skip over Judaism and just immediately get into this righteous, alt-right Christian nonsense, they don't even know what the hell they're talking about, in my opinion.
Reading the Bible without any concept of Judaism is not going to make any sense.
Well, if you learn how to become a Jew, you learn how to become Yeshua, because he was a Jewish rabbi. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you learn how to become Jesus-like, then you can become Jesus-like, but not until then, in my opinion. And so anyway, I went through those things. And then, of course, I've studied, the Quran. I've studied, Buddhism. I've studied Taoism, Lao Tzu. I love Chinese philosophy. And then, of course, Ganesh, with the Hindu. And, there's just all kinds of different aspects. But Wakantanka is the father in Native American culture. That is a Lakota word. And of course, every tribe has a different word for it. But I learned that one early because I had a Lakota teacher that we did a sweat ceremony, and he explained to me the whole thing of the connection to Wakantanka, which is the grandfather God, which we would call our God, which would be Elohim, Adonai, Jehovah Jireh, Allah, all those, Judeo-Christian Islamic names are all really about the God of Abraham, and basically I put them all together. So when I do my prayers and I do my smudge and I do my whatever I do in my thanks, I include all of them. I even use the unpronounceable word of, what they have in the Coptic faith and also in Kabbalah, which is you're supposed to just breathe it, but it's kind of like Yahweh, not Yahweh. That's another word.
Oh.
That's just a Jewish Hebrew word for God. But this is another word that the Kabbalists use, which is it's kind of like Yahweh, but you don't really say it, even though I just said it. You kind of just breathe it. It's the unpronounceable, because when you want to put the crosshairs on your prayer, you don't want to miss, so you basically make sure that everything is moving in the direction of what your positive energy is moving towards. And if you're doing it with a group of people, of course, it's the collective consciousness, the power of prayer of two or more, and that's an interesting concept too, that even non-religious people have studied in science, when they get all of these brains together with the same thought pattern, and they measure, microclimate and electronic energy in the atmosphere, and they put sensors on, they find the collective consciousness. There's a power there, So that is all part of what I learned with the Native American culture, is that there is a collective respect that happens when everybody's in the same wavelength. And if they're on the same wavelength as the animals, the trees, the forest, the rocks, everything are fractals. and science have discovered, have studied that. When you look at, snowflakes, and you look at waveforms, of sand that sit on a rubber diaphragm on top of a speaker. When you run through the frequency spectrum, they make these patterns. They're beautiful artistic forms, that are part of nature. When you blow through a tube, the overtone series is always the same. It's even the same as a string on a guitar. When you go through the overtone series, it's the same. All the fractals and the frequencies and everything's in tune. So that's the stuff that the Native Americans kind of knew without even having to have it explained on a scientific level. They already knew all this. But getting back to when we talk about Christianity and related to Native culture, when European settlers did come, and the ministers or the missionaries would tell the story of Jesus, and his concepts, they totally understood it. They would agree that those concepts were righteous and were correct, and that if this guy really did all these things, he must have been a really holy guy. And so, yeah, we dig him. We'll bring him into our folds. No different than they brought me into, the Six Nations Reservation. If you have the state of mind, they just bring you in. So they just brought Jesus in, and they just said, he's a cool guy. Yeah, okay, you want to make a building and you want to put a cross on top? All right, that's okay. He died on the cross? Okay, well, sometimes we do the sun dance. We die of our ego with the sun dance by attaching our skin to ropes and hanging for days, fasting for 3-4 days until the skin rips open and we finally fall. That's a sun dance. That's the sacrifice that they made, trying to connect to their God and whatever spiritual level that they were trying to get. It's like they saw the blood sacrifice. They understood it. I'm not talking about like Mayan, Aztecs, human sacrifice. That's a whole other thing. I'm just talking about flesh, bleeding, blood, offering, Jesus, cross, stigmata. It's just all, come on, you're a Viking. You ever watch the Viking series? They got blood flying all over the place and doing human sacrifices, and it's like that was part of the culture, and so that's why I think that I think that a lot of Scandinavian people kind of like the Native American concept of their spirituality, because they came from that. They were like the native, Europeans, and of course we all come from Lucy, which is in Africa. But when everybody moved north and everybody came across, the South Pacific, and the people came from Hawaii and Tahiti and settled in North America and down from the Aleutians. All that stuff, we all basically had very similar beliefs, because we wanted our family protected. We wanted our crops to grow. We wanted the hunt to go well. We wanted to be protected. We wanted to be on the high ground for floods. We wanted to be in the cave for the ice age. It's like everything was the same. So we all come from the same thing, and the thing for me, to answer your question, was that when I kind of reversed my Western thinking and my Christian thinking and put it back into the shelf of this naturalist, into with nature sort of, I don't want to call it pagan, because to me, like I just said, they totally understood Jesus. That's the reason why I was so interested. It was so easy for missionaries to convert a lot of Native Americans, because they liked the story. They went, yeah, okay. If it makes us get along better, yeah, we'll go along with this, because we're not going to give up still what we do, but we're going to take Jesus into our lives and embrace him as a brother. Why not? Because it seems like what he was doing was what we do. And guess what? Most alt-right Christians, in my opinion, don't do what he did. They don't do it. They're hypocrites, in my opinion. I'll leave you with that.
No argument from me there.
Not all of them,
Not all.
They go to Africa and go to India, and they're trying to spread the word, but they don't do it with force, and they don't do it with bribes, and they don't do it with putting down, and they just come in love. And then if people want to be loved and come into their world, it just has to be a Christian influence that's doing that, without any prejudice or any kind of force or any kind of
with the brown Yeshua, not that white Jesus idol that comes in and just bulldozes over everything.
It's just marketing. That's just a whole other thing. That was just
a whole other thing.
Yeah, conquistadors came to North America because they were white. They figured, well, if our God is white, then it'll make more sense. I mean, if we, it's like art going back to the beginning of time. When you look at Coptic and ancient Greek depictions of Yeshua, he's kind of brown. They kind of paint him with a darker skin. It was only after they got into the Renaissance and started getting more into the art part, where they could really add pigments, that's when they started making him in the image of their families, which were white Europeans, and it's okay. I mean, I don't get upset about it. I go, it only makes sense. They just want to be able to relate to the guy, and if they make him a lighter color, then they'll feel more comfortable. It's not like they're prejudiced. They just are saying, I like to see him this way because it makes me feel more comfortable because he feels like family,
I've never actually seen the movie, but I've heard it quoted before of Will Ferrell, like, "Dear 7 pound 6 ounce baby Jesus."
Yeah.
That's how I like to think of God. As a tiny little baby.
You're talking about Talladega Nights.
Yeah, I haven't even seen it. I've just heard that part referenced.
Right. Yeah, that's Talladega Nights. Yeah, there was a line from there. I want the baby Jesus. But yeah, so I like the beat up Jesus. I like the Jesus I like him when he was in the garden and he was sweating and he said, take this from me. I don't want to die. I mean, why are you forsaking me? I mean, it's like, I just wanted to teach love and all the things that you taught me. Why do I have to die? Why? He asked questions. And that's all in the Bible. I mean, it's not like he just went along with everything. After a while, I guess he just figured, well, I don't have much choice now. The Romans got their spears out, there's swords. I don't want them to kill all my friends around me. So I guess I should just take one for the college team, take one for the Gipper or whatever they say, So when he went up on the cross, he just sort of like went, this is just the way it turned out. This is the way the cookie crumbles. This is the way the dice rolled, And but I like that. That's the Jesus I like. I like that Jesus, the Yeshua that asked questions, the Yeshua that was unsure, the Yeshua that was not entirely convinced that God knew what he was doing. I mean, he was just sort of like going. But what he would do is that at the end of it all, he would finally say, if it be your will, only if it be your will. And that's what I do. I mean, when I get into my prayer and I say all the things, my wish list, I'm going down my list of all the things, people that need to be healed and the blessings I'm supposed to have and, my safety on the road and my flight not to crash, and I go through all this stuff. And then at the end, I say, but only if it be your will. And you get rid of it. And that's why they always say you take your problems to the foot of the cross, because then you're not burdened with it anymore. You can let it go. Because then if you do die, you're not just sitting there going, God, I should have prayed a little harder. I should have given more money to the church. I should have, asked for more forgiveness. I should have gone to confession more. No, just let all of it go, just only if it be your will. So that's what I think that the Jesus that I love did at those points. And that's the part that I like. It was that he was at that point, even though he was supposed to be God in a human form, he was a human at that point, and that's where we connect. Now, did he exist physically? Do we have proof? Do we have his bones? Do we have his grave? I mean, if you want to get into the scientific, forensic part of that.
I don't want to get into the scientifics of that.
Matter if he did or not. You know what I mean? Just the stories that were written about him that he didn't write, because we know he didn't write the Bible. He just lived it, The stories that were written about this individual were good teachings. And even if it was a manufactured marketing tool, like we were just talking about with the color and the skin and the art and the conquistadors and, native people, it's like, it still was a good story and it still was a good teaching tool. And it was righteous. It followed properly and simply. It didn't have to be complicated. When they got into all that pharisaical stuff with all the laws and the things, the boop, the beep, the bop, it just lost its core, which was just love your neighbor as yourself and, be kind. That's it.
At the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned his wife, Diana Steinberg Lewis. I hope you'll check out this conversation. It's so stinking cool about Black history, about music history. Your life will be so much better knowing about Martha Jean the Queen. Also, hugs!